Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. I'm Dad, this is my den. Today I am continuing my series on my role-playing game journey. This is part 4, and we're talking about 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now I have all sorts of love for basic expert D&D. I have a lot of nostalgic love for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the 1st edition. And I don't have as much of that for 2nd edition, even though I probably ended up playing more 2nd edition D&D than the other two. And a lot of that had to do with when it came out and what age I was. So let's kind of snap into it. 1989 is when these books are published. So I would have been in high school at that point. I've been reading about the coming of these books in Dragon Magazine for some time. I was 100% in on it. I was definitely at that age where the newest is the best. Let's get it. Let's get the new edition, right? And a 2nd edition made some sense. It had been obviously a long time since 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons had been published. A lot of material had been published for it since then. There were a lot of addenda and corrections and people asking questions about how spells worked or magic items worked in Dragon Magazine. So there was a lot of material, and it kind of makes sense to, okay, let's fold all this stuff in, maybe improve organization, etc. The game itself is not terribly different from 1st edition. Not so much that you couldn't pick it up and start playing it just about right away. But it did have a few changes, some innovations. Ultimately was kind of going along the path of adding a little more complexity that kind of ultimately pushed me back towards basic expert or the clones thereof. But let's get into it. So first and foremost, we have the player's handbook. It's a nice cover. It does not do for me what the 1st edition covers did, but I like it. It's good art. Jeff Easley, I believe. Now this is not the original book that I owned. I did get rid of those at a certain point when I got out of D&D. These are ones that I bought later on. This is an 11th printing, so this one came from like 97, I believe it said. You can also tell because we have an ad for all the different campaign settings that were out at the time. Obviously, none of those were out in 89. Well, not for 2nd edition. You got some good art. It is well organized with the blue headings, examples of play, ability scores. You get the classes. Now, one of the first things you notice that's different as you get into the character races is no half-orcs. So that was kind of weird at first. You're kind of going, what did they miss it? Where did I not see it? What are they doing here? So we lose the half-orcs. When we get to the monsters, we'll talk about the other thing that was left out. Now, they reorganized the classes into these 4 categories. Fighter, rogue, priest, wizard. Not a bad idea. It's not terribly different from the subclasses that were done in 1st edition. I don't know that it needed to be done, but they done it. And most of the classes, they're not terribly different. There's differences, but I remember converting characters at the time and not really freaking out about it per se. The wizards got the different schools of magic. They did more with it, so you could specialize into different schools. That kind of folded in the illusionist class, so instead of it being a subclass, it was a specialization. The priest got different mythoi and different, what's the word I'm looking for? Spheres, I think, of power. Could be getting that wrong. We have a dryad. And that was kind of cool, but, the downside to some of that is that from a dungeon master standpoint, you have these classes, they're fairly set in stone. I mean, especially in the oldest editions, there's no real options in terms of the character class and what it can do. All the options are really in how you play the character. So if you're a knight in shining armor, or you're a, swashbuckling, fighter, whatever, that's just all based on how you're playing it. You have the same hit dice, you have the same everything. And that's a useful shorthand for the dungeon master. You can have all that information in your head while you're playing. And when you start putting in a lot of these options, great for players, but for a dungeon master, you either have to memorize a lot more or you have to consult your books a lot. And if you have players who don't do the best at actually keeping track of the rules and what their characters can do, it can be a little bit rough. You got secondary skills in this, weapon specialization, so they added that. And then they have the non-weapon proficiency groups. So in first edition, you had weapon proficiency. You had a certain number of weapons your character would be proficient at using. And if you tried to use weapons you weren't proficient with, you got a penalty to attack. And that depended on your class. In Oriental Adventures, in first edition, they add non-weapon proficiencies to the characters, like calligraphy and flower arrangement, which I know sounds funny, but they're courtly things that a samurai might need to do, and could actually come up in a game if you're doing it right. So they bring that in now to make it official in second edition. So you have things like agriculture, cooking, carpentry, cobbling. The idea is you're not going to use these to replace abilities of the character classes, although there is a tracking ability, and the ranger is better at it than everybody. But it was to round out the character. So that's great, but it is more for dungeon masters to have to sort of memorize. Here you see a lot of the line art. It's all in blue, which was odd at the time. I wasn't in love with the art. So the non-weapon, and you get your money and equipment. And again, a lot of this works the same. You do get some nice color art in the book. You got your combat. They put in the non, or the unarmed combat. They tried to expand on that. I think it's a little more complicated than it really needs to be. There's more of a thing with attacking with two weapons. But you could see all these things that were cropping up over the course of time they're trying to address here. And they did a good job. These books are not massive. They're not hard to get through. They're very well organized. They're good. I like second edition. It's a good edition. If you're out there, pick it up, play it. I think you'll like it. Of course, we got all the different spells. My only quibble is I ultimately, as I got older, I liked things to be a little less complex and a little more hand wavy. You know what I mean? Kind of keep it simple. So next up, we have the Dungeon Master Guide. I like this cover better than the Player's Handbook one, but it doesn't really compare to the first edition. Now, if you're a first edition person, the DM's Guide was thicker than the Player's Handbook. It's the opposite here. This one belonged initially to, see if I can read it, Carl Ketterer. Carl Ketterer, if you're out there, I inherited your book, and God bless you. It's good. Now, this actually is a first printing. I think there's a price tag in the back. I think I got it for about $10. And I, this does everything that you really need a DM's guide to do. It gives you, tips on how to run the campaign and little bits and pieces and all that, and your character saving throws on the turn, and you get all your magic items and all that good stuff. The one thing that it doesn't have though is Gary Gygax. There's something kind of special about the first edition stuff that he wrote, high Gygaxian as they call it, as much as sometimes it could also be, a little more than you needed. But yeah, I miss that about it. But these are good books, and they're well written by Zeb Cook. They're well organized, and you can get a hell of a good game out of them. No doubt about that. The third one, the Monstrous Compendium. This is definitely, and this is the first one I owned. I never got rid of this. At first, when I got this, I thought it was the greatest idea ever. So it's a binder. And unlike Mitt Romney, it's a binder full of monsters. You had these awesome art cards that you could use as dividers. The monsters get a full page or sometimes 2 pages. And like with Great Cats, they put all their stats on one thing, since the description is not real complicated. And I thought this was fantastic. You get a lot more information on the monsters. I think some of the stuff in the old ecology articles in Dragon were brought over. I liked it, but and also I like the idea as a dungeon master. If you're running a particular game, you grab 7 or 8 monsters that you're going to need the stats for. You could put them in a little binder, take them with you instead of the whole book. The only problem I had with this over time was you almost started getting too much description for the monsters. Instead of just sort of here's the I don't know how you ever pronounce this. I always just said Catoblepus. Here's the Catoblepus. Here's what it can do attack-wise, and it lives in a swamp. And the Dungeon Master can then kind of do the rest of the work himself, and this lays it all out. Now, of course, you could ignore it, but, it sort of started standardizing things. So the game becomes a little bit less sort of every Dungeon Master's game is a little different. It starts standardizing things, which 3rd edition would then take up a notch. Now, in this particular one, I also have the Demons supplement that was done by Mayfair Games. Well, why was Mayfair Games doing a Demons supplement? You can see kind of what they're obviously doing it, so it'll go in these binders, keeping it similar. Why? Well, the Satanic Panic. Some groups complained about Dungeons and Dragons, and TSR pretty much caved. And so the half-orcs, because they're sort of evil, so they're out as a playable race, and the demons and devils are gone. Now, they would later come back as the Batezu and Tanari or whatever in Planescape, because they're sort of trying, they're not demons and devils, they're these weird creatures from another, come on. Yeah, so that was kind of weak. That was kind of bogus. So Mayfair took advantage of it. They did the Rolaids line, which a lot of old-time gamers will remember. Monsters of Myth and Legends. I'll show that off one day. I also have these, which are kind of interesting historically. Gads of Golems. I photocopied these out of White Wolf magazine. This is probably going to be loud. No, that wasn't bad. Because I thought they were pretty cool, and I love that art. It was the copper golem and the lead golem, blah 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 blah. I think White Wolf magazine. It was a kind of competitor for Dragon. I mean, but it wasn't quite as polished as Dragon was at the time. I think it might have led to the whole White Wolf, the company that produced quite a lot of material for 3rd edition D&D. So kind of interesting. That was sort of its origins. So, Monstrous Compendium, you would buy different packs, and you could just add them in and put them in alphabetically with the stuff that was already there. You know, you could make your own monsters up, add them as well. And, you know, it's a good supplement, and it's a great idea, but I have to admit, there came a time where I really preferred the much more compact, you know, monster manuals that didn't have to sort of maybe pad out monster descriptions because we needed it to take up a full page. You know, you didn't get just little quickies. So one of the things that is well remembered about 2nd edition are the campaign settings. They would generally come in boxes, and you had your Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, Ravenloft, Dark Sun, Greyhawk. I really didn't buy any of them. Because at the time I was just making my own campaign world, and I just didn't need the expense. But I did get, and this is one I've held on to, I did get Al-Qadim, which were rules for giving a sort of Middle Eastern Arabian flavor to your games. Some really nice art, well written, some good ideas in it. And I did use some of these. Now, I believe Al-Qadim actually is part of the Forgotten Realms setting by Ed Greenwood. But so I did have this one. And people will also remember the Splat books. And this is where, between the box sets and the Splat books, this is where 2nd edition maybe starts going off the rails a little bit. You know, you start off, let's see if I can find, I've only got a few here still. Yeah, I don't have any of the basic ones. You start off with like the complete fighter, the complete thief, the complete wizard, whatever. And you'd get character kits, which were essentially like the old NPC classes from 1st edition. It was a modification of an existing class. Some of them were good. Some of them were just kind of some non-weapon proficiencies and what have you. Again, adds complexity, adds stuff. Now a dungeon master can't say 3rd level fighter. It's a 3rd level fighter with the such and such this and that, and he's also opted for this and that. The stat blocks start getting a lot fatter. But I got a few of these. This is the Arms and Equipment Guide, which was kind of cool. You got, like, you know, some ideas for different kinds of armor. It wasn't bad. I'm not even sure why I still have it, to be completely honest. There was a Viking source book to do campaigns set in there. Oh, there's even got the map still in the book. Never took that out. Age of Heroes, like ancient Greece. Also with a map in it. And A Mighty Fortress, which sort of brings the game into the 1600s, or it might have been earlier than that. I know, and I'm a history major, and I don't know that. We'll call it the Elizabethan age. Yeah, it's not the 1600s, but you get gunpowder and stuff in this one. But over time, there came to be quite a few of those. And it added a lot of complexity, and it cost a lot of money. But I think the campaign settings became the bigger problem. And the reason was, when everything starts becoming setting specific, you're kind of dividing up your fan base. And so, as opposed to an adventure module, that pretty much anybody can use. A Forgotten Realms one is going to be used by Forgotten Realms DMs and players, but the different settings might not need it or be able to use it. I mean, they could. But yeah, it started, I think, to fragment things a little bit, and ultimately led to some problems for TSR and second edition. But on the whole, I had no quibbles with the mechanics. I thought it worked fine. I played in Dungeon Mastered a fair amount of it. When I was going to UNLV, I met a guy playing Captain America and the Avengers, if you remember that old arcade game. I'd be in the student union playing it after class. He happened to be in there at the same time. We were both playing it. We eventually got where we could both beat it on 1 quarter. It was a lot of fun. So I became friends with him. His name is Tony. He's one of the greatest guys I ever knew in my life. And Tony wanted to get a D&D game going. All right, I got second edition. Let's do it. I had some campaign world ideas that I've been working on for a few years, off and on. So we got a group together, which included another friend, Dan Sudium, another one of the best people I ever knew. He was probably at that time a good 20 years older than the rest of us. And he'd played D&D from the beginning. He had the white box. He brought it one time, and it's the first time I ever got to saw the original D&D books. He'd had them since he bought them. So it was fun having him in the game because he was very experienced, and he was a funny guy and just good-natured and played the game well. And Tony and a few other folks. And so we'd meet, I think maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks at Tony's apartment and played a lot of sessions of second edition with those guys. It's a couple funny stories. One day, Tony brings another friend over just to play that one session. Now, Tony had a job at the Treasure Island Resort here in Las Vegas. It's a pirate-themed resort. And in the past, they had a very elaborate pirate battle that would take place in front of the hotel. You had a pirate ship, you had a Royal Navy ship. It would cruise around this promontory. They'd exchange shots. There was a whole big show with fireworks and the whole 9 yards. And in the end, the pirates would win because, of course, this is Las Vegas. And the English ship would sink, and the captain would go down with his ship as everybody else escaped. It was a great show. It was fun. You could probably find it out there on YouTube. Well, Tony was one of the pirates. And he brought a guy who I believe was another one of the pirates. So this guy comes in, and he is essentially Hulk Hogan. He sounded like Hulk Hogan. He kind of dressed like Hulk Hogan. He was a big guy. He was Hulk Hogan. It's the closest I will ever have come to play D&D with Hulk Hogan. And so we roll up a character for him, a half-orc fighter, who also acted like Hulk Hogan. And we got him into the game. And this is he did something that I absolutely loved, and I talk about to this day to people, because I think it highlights something that is important to the game and is sometimes overlooked. I had this campaign world. There was this mega dungeon they're exploring. There was a whole plot involving were-rats, and this city had been built by forced labor by these dwarves. Or no, it wasn't forced labor. They had dwarves build this thing, and then they cheated the dwarves. And so the dwarves had rigged up this thing that would allow a person to destroy this city. It was like the city on its foundations, it came down to like a thin pillar. And if it was damaged, if it was, in some way, the entire city could collapse. All right. So these guys are in one of the upper levels. We never got that far in this game. They're in an upper level, and they're searching around. And they're they're pretty sure there are going to be undead lurking about of some kind. And so the party does what parties always do and what they're always told not to do. They split the party. They split the party. You guys go this way, we'll go check out this way. And this is a side note. For modern games that are super worried about encounter balance, when you split the party, you make all the encounters twice as difficult. Don't split the party, especially in modern games. Can't do it. So they split the party. One half goes over, the other half goes over. Now, we split the players between two rooms. So I'm with the group that includes, we'll just say Hulk Hogan. And they go down and they're looking around. They don't find anything really. They find some old ropes and chains and things like that, tools or whatever. Okay, so I go. So one of them said, okay, we'll go back and join the rest of the party. Hulk Hogan goes, no, wait a minute. Hold on a minute. I got an idea. He goes, let's grab the chains. And we'll head back towards there, but we'll start rattling the chains. And we'll start moaning and groaning. And I'm like going, you got to be kidding me. This is genius. And the others are like, oh, hell yeah, let's do this. This is great. Okay, go to the other room. And the other group, and you go and do their thing. And they don't really find anything. So they're coming back to meet the other group. And I describe it for them. As you're heading back, you begin hearing these chains clanking. And these eerie sounds, moans, whatever. Oh, God, man, we're all worried, you know. Oh my God, it's the undead. Oh, maybe they got everybody else already. And I think the cleric was with that other group, so they're going, oh, we don't even have our cleric. So these guys are like, okay, get our weapons ready, just prepare my spell. They're hyped. They're hyped. And they turn the corner and they see all their comrades basically screwing with them. And they're like, yeah, you son of a, but everybody was laughing and having a good time. And it shows that it's not up to just the dungeon master to run these games and to be the creative one and the inventive one. The players shouldn't always just be reacting. If you find opportunities like that, take them. It makes it a more fun game for everybody, and actually also, adds a surprise for the dungeon master. That's something he's not ready for. And I was dying. It was really funny. It was great. So I had a lot of good times with that group, and we got a lot of play in. And like I say, I probably ran more second edition than I ever ran first and basic, because I was a lot younger then, and it was just me and some other kids, and we goof around for a while. I think with the earlier editions, I did far more plotting and planning and making stuff up that I never got to run than I did with second edition. And that's why I can tell you, second edition is a solid game. Now, my advice would be get the player's handbook, get the DM's guide. They eventually did do a monster manual, just the book instead of that compendium. You can probably find that. Get those 3 books, use those. You can probably avoid all the other material. You really don't need all that stuff. I think it's more complications than you need. And maybe get one of the box sets if you could find them. I don't even know how much those cost nowadays on the secondary market, but maybe get one of those and use that, or design your own campaign world. But second edition, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, that was my game from late high school through college. And when I got out of college and I got married, it looked like that was going to be the end of Dungeons & Dragons. Because I had other responsibilities. I had things I needed to do. And so I let the group know, I was going to have to stop dungeon mastering, and that was it. And maybe a year or two later, I packed up most of my D&D stuff, and I gave it away to some friends who were playing second edition Advanced D&D a lot. And later on, I'd get the call from that group. Third edition D&D had been published. Do you want to play? Do you want a dungeon master? And I got back into it. And when I did, the woman that I gave those old D&D things to said, here. I didn't have the heart to get rid of most of this stuff. A few things were missing. Somebody had taken the the second edition books because they were using them. Oh, I lost my box set of Greyhawk. So stupid to have gotten rid of that, but I got most of it back. And so God bless Jessica Gagich. She did me a solid. She really did. And so maybe next time around, maybe I'll do third edition. We'll talk a little bit about that, and maybe some of the clones that came out because of the open game license. Maybe I'll talk about Dragon Magazine. I have a lot of those. Maybe we'll talk about some of the supplements. At some point, I'm going to get into a whole bunch of other games that, we're in the D&D orbit, other role-playing games. We'll see. We'll see what part 5 is. I don't know yet. But I think that does it for second edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It's a good game. It's a solid game. I do highly recommend it for people who want a game. It's a good book. I think it's become in a weird way, kind of the redheaded stepchild, because so many people who were playing it did move on to third edition, and a lot of us, our heart was with those old editions, and it's become a little forgotten, but it really shouldn't be. You can probably pick it up at a reasonable price. So I think that'll do it for this one. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoy the videos I do, please give it the thumbs up, give it the like, and please subscribe. That helps me out tremendously. If you have any comments, any memories of your own of second edition, or the mini box sets that went with it, or all those kits, those millions of kits for fighters. There was the complete elf book and complete. Oh my God, there were so many kits. If there are any of those that you loved, hey, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you, and maybe we can get some conversations going with some other people who loved second edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. In the meantime, I hope you have an awesome time today. Please be kind to one another, and I will see you again on the next Dad's Den of Pop Culture. So long.